This is part 2 of the short story, The Whistle. We will start with question 7. Read. As you read lines 72 to 93, continue to collect text evidence. Underline what the narrator learns in lines 88 to 93. In the margin, explain what the narrator could have done to keep her grandmother from being trapped. My brothers placed her in the chair nearest the kitchen stove while I fetched a soft woolen blanket to wrap her in. Chewy poured a cup of coffee and set it before her. Then we all sat down around the table, staring at our obviously infuriated grandmother. "What unfortunate children you are! You have no brains," she said in a raspy voice. Her entire body was shivering. "You left me to die out there." She shook her fist at each one of us and then looked squarely at me. "You, Telthasora, you must be deaf." She shook a crooked index finger at me. I knew she was very angry with me because she never used my real name. "I called and called for you. The wind blew that door shut and it locked. All afternoon I yelled, but you didn't come. I nearly froze to death." She scowled and slowly turned her head away from me. "But I didn't hear you," I answered. "I'm sorry, please. Abuelita, I'm truly sorry." How could I have confused my grandmother's voice with that of a bleeding goat? I felt terribly guilty and ashamed. I knew that the shed door was prone to latch by itself if it was slammed. That's why a wooden stake for propping the door open was usually kept nearby. But this time the stake had not been used, and now my grandmother was shaking and shivering and glaring at me. Number 8, read, and discuss. With a small group, that's yourself, discuss whether the evidence in the text justifies the grandmother's feelings towards the narrator once she is rescued, and the narrator's feelings once she realizes the mistake that she has made. So it's asking you, is the grandmother justified? Is it okay that she's upset? Does our narrator does she deserve to be, her grandmother mad at her? "Just you wait," tells Sephora. "Just you wait until your father gets home. I'll have him punish you," she said, and her bottom lip quivered and her nostrils flared. My parents came home in a few days, and of course, the first thing that occurred was that Abuelita told her story to my father. "Son, tell Sephora left me locked in the storage shed all afternoon on Saturday. I called and called for her, but she declares she didn't hear me. She said she heard a goat bleating. Can you imagine that I could possibly sound like a goat?" my grandmother said. My father was very concerned, of course. I admitted to him that, indeed, I had mistakenly thought I heard a goat and that I was terribly sorry that I hadn't checked on Abuelita as I should have. He scolded me severely. But this wasn't enough punishment. According to my grandmother, so she decided to penalize me herself by refusing to speak to me. This made me very sad, and it seemed to affect all of us. A sense of sorrow and discomfort permeated our family. Number 9. As you read lines 94 to 109, continue to cite text evidence. Underline text evidence that confirms that the relationship between the narrator and her grandmother has taken a turn for the worse. In the margin, make an inference, a guess, about Abuelita's motivation for telling on the narrator. What does this tell you about her? What does this tell you about the grandmother? Why did she decide to tell on our narrator? Question 10. Read lines 103 to 109, noting what the narrator tells her father in her own defense. What does this tell you about her personality? So this would be characterization, guys. What is our author doing to help us understand our narrator character? Please write in complete sentences. You may want to pause the video at this time. Two weeks later, I asked to go with my father to the big yellow store in town. While Papa made his purchases, I bought a silver whistle and a long piece of blue satin ribbon. I threaded the ribbon through the ring on the whistle and tied the ends of the ribbon together. That evening, I placed the whistle in a little box and wrapped it in some colored paper. After supper, I approached my grandmother. "This is for you, Abuelita," I'm terribly sorry for what happened to you in the shed. I hope you can forgive me. My grandmother looked at me and said nothing. Then she took the box and opened it. She pulled the whistle out by its ribbon. Well, Telfosora, whatever is this for? She asked, keeping her eyes on the whistle. It's to wear around your neck when you're outside. If you need me, just blow the whistle and I'll come to you, I said. And can I be sure you'll hear this little whistle? You couldn't even hear me yelling at you. But Abuela put it around her neck anyway. The next evening, while I was feeding the chickens, I heard a faint whistle. I stopped what I was doing and stood very still. Then I heard the whistle more distinctly. Yes, it was definitely coming from inside the storage shed. I rushed to the shed and found the door latched. That surprised me because the wind wasn't blowing at all. Question 11. As you read lines 110 to 141, continue to cite text evidence. Circle each use of the word whistle. In the margin, explain what idea the narrator might be emphasizing by repeating this word. Underline details of Abuelita's behavior in lines 128 and 1 to 141. So why is the author emphasizing the word whistle? Why repeat it? And then think about what the grandmother's behavior is like in those lines, 128 to 141. There was no way the door could have slammed shut by itself. Something seemed really strange about this, and I was suspicious. I unlatched the door and opened it. There stood my grandmother with the whistle in her mouth. She quickly removed it and said, I think your papa needs to do something about that crazy door latch. Don't you think so, Chatita? She hurried out of the shed and we started toward the house. I could see she was smiling, and I think I even heard her chuckling. Question 12. Reread lines 128 to 141. How did Abuelita get locked in the shed this time? So think about, from what you've read, use a piece of text evidence to explain how the grandmother gets locked inside the shed. Now, for the short response, you do need to use our ACIT model, which will be answer the question, think about what the question's asking you, and use words from the prompt to answer it. Cite a piece of text evidence and explain it. It's best if you can use 2 pieces of text evidence. Explain what the whistle symbolizes for both Chatita and Abuelita. Cite text evidence to support your ideas. So think about in the story what the whistle, even though it's a item, you can hold it, right? What else does it mean? What does it mean to the grandmother, and what does it mean to Chatita, our narrator? What does the whistle symbolize? So your first sentence, you're going to want to use words from that prompt. You're going to want to say the whistle symbolizes and then answer that question. Then use a piece of evidence for Chatita and use a piece of evidence for Abuelita. And you can either explain both of those after the evidence, or you can explain what each evidence means separately.